This is Software Engineering Radio, the podcast for professional developers on the web at se-radio.net. SE Radio is brought to you by the IEEE Computer Society and by IEEE Software Magazine. Online at computer.org/software. SE Radio listeners, we want to hear from you. Please visit se-radio.net/survey to share a little information about your professional interests and listening habits. It takes less than 2 minutes to help us continue to make SE Radio even better. Your responses to the survey are completely confidential. That's se-radio.net/survey. Thanks for your support of the show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Welcome to Software Engineering Radio, and I'm your host, Priyanka Raghavan, in conversation with Satish Mohan from air-gapped networks, and we're going to be discussing the topic air-gapped networks. Satish is the Chief Technology Officer at air-gapped networks, where he's responsible for technology architecture and program innovation. Having known Satish for a while now, he's also well known in the area of building distributed large-scale systems. So his wealth of experience comes from that. Satish, we're really glad to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hi, Priyanka. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Absolutely looking forward to this.
Is there anything else that you would like to add about yourself for listeners to know before we jump into air-gapped networks?
I think you gave a great introduction, by the way. Thank you very much for that. So my background really spans a variety of systems, starting from building large-scale distributed systems all the way to cloud-based applications, security, and software-defined networking.
Great. So let's just jump right into the show. And the first thing we'll do is maybe start with a round of introductions on the topic. So at SE Radio, we've done shows on network security. We recently did a show on BGP. We have had a show on zero trust networks, but we've actually never talked about air-gapped networks. So what is this term? Can you explain that for us listeners?
Sure. So the term air-gapped networks, it's a term which historically, if you look at it, it was popularized from defense and financial systems. So there were all these absolutely mission-critical systems. You had to protect them at any cost from outside attackers, malware, ransomware, things like this. So what they did at that time was they physically disconnected the system from any kind of network, absolutely isolated it. So there was no network access to the system from other systems or from the internet itself. That is how the term came about. So it's literally you're putting an air gap around the system. Obviously, this provides like great physical security, but in reality, it makes such systems really, really hard and impractical to use.
Where would you use this kind of air-gapped network? Is it only in military installations or anywhere else?
What we're seeing nowadays is that many of the network-based attacks, such as ransomware, these rely on lateral propagation within the network. The way ransomware spreads is it attacks your first victim and then they scan the network to see what are the critical systems they can laterally infect and compromise. So to protect against these kind of threats, historically what's been done is people used to air gap these absolutely mission critical systems away from the regular enterprise network so that even if the enterprise network were compromised, the mission critical systems don't get impacted. It's a great concept in theory, but up to now, till we introduced our air-gapped network solution based on this, it has been really hard to put it into practice because the only way of moving data in and out of systems is by physical media. You literally have to take a USB stick it into an air-gapped system, copy the data, and physically somebody has to walk out with it, transport it to a shared network. So very, very hard to operationalize in practice. So we haven't seen these kind of systems really being deployed in enterprises and organizations. It's used traditionally that the classical air gap systems have been used only in very secure defense installations.
So the way you would actually move data between an air-gapped network and maybe somewhere like a shared network is through some physical means like external USB drive, etc. is what you're saying. Yeah,
that is right. Since these systems are physically disconnected from the entire network, literally a human being has to go in there, copy the data out into some kind of removable media, like a USB stick, for example, and I actually copy it out and transport it to another system where they can analyze it, look at it, or share it with other people.
So I have one more question with regards to this physical thing. So I've also heard about, like, I think in the news, I remember that reading about an air gap network, like a nuclear facility, and that was actually infiltrated by one of these Stuxnet worm. I think it was an Iranian facility. So it looks like these kind of networks are also susceptible to attacks like, radio frequency. Have you read up anything about that? Can you maybe elaborate more? How do you protect against that? Can you do something extra to protect against those kind of attacks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically these kind of attacks are carried out by nation state actors. These are very highly sophisticated attacks, like doing a radio frequency attack onto a target system. What we have seen is secure defense installations. They place these systems in metal cages, like the term Faraday cage is commonly used. So you literally put the system inside a Faraday cage. So it provides like electromagnetic shielding even from radio frequency attacks. Not very common, but again, nation state attacks, these kind of things are very prevalent. And also you bring up a good point regarding the attack on the Iranian nuclear facility, the Stuxnet worm. So again, this is a great example. So they had a lot of programmable logic controllers inside the nuclear facility. So what the infiltration did was, again, they through a human vector, they delivered an infected USB drive. Somebody walked into the facilities, unknowingly put in an infected USB drive, and then the worm was able to spread within the nuclear facility. So one thing to note here that is, you might have air-gapped a bunch of systems from the outside network, but still those systems within themselves are still vulnerable to being infected unless you also make sure that you microsegment each system individually. All this leads to the conclusion that we do need some kind of a network microsegmentation architecture to be put into place on any kind of shared network.
So in other words, if I were to paraphrase, don't fall into the trap that air gap networks does everything for you. You still have to do your defense in depth and have microsegmentation, etc. Right?
Definitely. And as we all know that any good security strategy is built upon layered security. It's never the case that organizations adopt one particular type of security technology and claim they are immune to malware attacks. So you have to build up your security layers to provide a good defense strategy.
Let's maybe switch gears to say what your company does, which is, I think, a virtual air gap network. Am I right? Could you talk about that? What does that involve?
What we have done is we have borrowed this popular historical term air gap networks. And as you rightly said, we provide a virtual air gap network. So the problem we are really trying to address is the enterprise campus networks. So if you look at a traditional enterprise networks today, like if you were to walk into your office, let us say, so your device, your company issued laptop, or maybe you have a mobile phone, it automatically gets authenticated, placed onto the wireless network. Because you're a trusted employee and you get immediately, based on the wireless network which you join, you're assigned certain roles and privileges. Like, for example, you might be able to access the engineering network or the IT network, things like that. What we have seen is today in this post-COVID-19 pandemic, hybrid work has risen in prominence. So people are moving in and out of campuses. So when you are within the campus, you're protected with layers of enterprise security software stacks. You have your next generation firewalls, you have your endpoint protection, multiple layers protecting you. But the same employee may decide to work from a coffee shop on a few days, and unsuspectingly, he or she might click on a phishing link delivered by an email message. That's a very popular target vector to compromise the first victim. So now your device gets infected, and next day you walk into your office environment again, enterprise location. Your laptop joins the shared network, and the way shared networks have been built is they're based on the VLAN technology. So within the VLAN technology, there is no protection across devices east-west within the network itself. It's a shared broadcast media. Historically, it's been around since the late 80s till now. It's based on devices broadcasting on the VLAN network and communicating with each other. So this provides an ideal opportunity for the malware or ransomware to literally, within a matter of a few minutes, laterally infect other devices on your network till it finds a particular device which has enough credentials to go after your data center assets, cloud assets. Maybe it has certain IAM keys on it, which can further lead to compromise of your sensitive business data. So what we do as air gap networks is basically microsegment your enterprise network. So the moment you walk into your enterprise, your device or laptop is placed into its own virtual isolated network. So no data can get in or out from your device unless it's a authorized flow permitted by the air gap appliance, security appliance. So we've built upon this notion to provide our solution called the Zero Trust Isolation. Obviously, we have extended this to different scenarios like hybrid workforce, on campus, secure application access, and different areas built on this.
So that's very interesting. So one more thing which I want to ask you before jumping in more into the architecture is, so you've got your air gap network that's protecting your key assets, as you say. But one of the things I have discovered in my podcasting journey is one of the first episodes I did with CISO of Maersk was about this NotPetya attack that they had. And the case study with this, that is what we did in that episode. And the key finding from that was the importance of an offline backup, because the company was able to bring up its resources because they didn't have a good offline backup. And finally, they were able to bring up the entire AD by one particular computer, which was not on the network because some sort of a power failure in one country where this company operated from. So can you maybe talk a little bit about the importance of, say, an offline backup for all your key resources? That still holds good, right? Even though if you're air-gapped, etc.
Sure, definitely. Offline backups are definitely an important component of a good ransomware defense strategy. Again, building on the concept of layered defenses, recent attacks have shown that this is not sufficient. What the attackers are now doing is they're resorting to something called double extortion, or there's a term called triple extortion. So what they do is once they breach into your enterprise, they exfiltrate all the sensitive data out and put it up on the dark web. And in fact, last week, there was a very recent attack where a prominent Fortune 500 company was compromised. And literally on the dark web, there is a counter ticking away till the ransom is paid. If the ransom is not paid by that particular time, what happens is they release the data for sale within the dark web. So definitely a very scary scenario for an enterprise having the sensitive data just being sold on the dark web. So this is what double extortion is. A triple extortion is they frequently come back and breach again and exfiltrate or try to release it again in spite of the ransom being paid as well. So definitely very scary scenarios. And as you can see, you might use an offline backup to recover your data, but it still doesn't prevent the attackers from releasing sensitive data onto the public domain. Only way to solve this, you need to prevent the attack from happening in the first place.
This is great. So maybe we can switch gears and get into the architecture. Can you talk a little bit about the network architecture? What are your main components and how do they communicate?
So the air gap network architecture, it's based on deploying an inline security appliance. So when I say security appliance, we do support both physical or a virtual form factors. In fact, most of our customers prefer the virtual form factor. So this appliance is actually deployed onto your shared VLAN network within the enterprise. So what we have seen is typically one appliance is sufficient to cover a medium-sized organization, which may have like tens of VLANs and several thousands of devices. We provide different capacities and form factors, but usually one appliance is sufficient for one enterprise location. So this security appliance gets its configuration, policy, and control from a SaaS-based solution, which is hosted on the public cloud. We onboard the customers onto our SaaS portal. Everything about this security appliance is managed through the cloud interface kind of thing. And once you've deployed the air gap security appliance, look at how it operates on the network. The air gap security appliance becomes the default gateway within the shared VLAN network. Commonly, we take over the DHCP functionality within the network. So when systems on your network request for IP addresses, we will hand out IP addresses. And there is a certain core part of our technology which enables us to hand out IP addresses in such a way so that any system, when it wants to talk to any other system, it has to go through the default gateway. And since we are the default gateway, it puts us in the ideal position to inspect the traffic and only allow permitted flows to go through. So the nice thing about this technology is it works for both, like for your regular enterprise systems and for IoT systems. One of the challenges with other existing security solutions we have seen in the market is that with IoT devices, it's frequently impossible to install any kind of security agent on the device itself because they're running like proprietary operating systems. The vendors don't support it. Frequently, you cannot even install anything on them. So there is no other way of protecting these systems other than the air gap approach, where we actually sit on the network, inspect the traffic flows, and only permit authorized flows. This kind of gives you an idea of how the architecture actually works. Everything is cloud managed. The appliances are on-prem. They can also be placed on the cloud as well. We have customers who use different form factors. We have a whole range of options around these.
So if I understand the SaaS-based solution that you have, does that only store the configurations required for having this gateway in your network? Is that what you're saying? Or?
That is true. In fact, this is a question we frequently get asked by our potential customers. So we do not store any customer data in our cloud at all. It's only the configuration. Frequently, we do store some analytics information, but this is for our ML-based algorithms to come up with better predictive suggestions on how to protect your network. But again, it's only like the metadata which is stored in the cloud, no customer data at all.
So Satish, I also have another question, which you can stop me if it's a very basic or a dumb question. But one of the things is I currently work for an organization where, we build products on the cloud. We don't have any on-prem solution at all now. And of course, we also store customer data, but it's all on the cloud provider database, etc. In this kind of a thing, can you also do air gapping on, say, the important DBs which are holding customer data and, some other, and eventing a stream can be put in some other network? Or for example, in Azure, you have this thing called as a virtual network. Can you air gap that virtual network?
Definitely. So air gapping networks in the cloud can certainly be achieved. Probably the easiest way to achieve it, I would say, is to start with the cloud provider's own network security settings. Both AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, all the cloud providers provide you notions such as the VPC security groups and policies. That is a good start, I would say. Any good approach to protect a cloud workload also has to be combined with a good DevOps hygiene, a DevOps methodology. So the challenge is slightly different in cloud environments. It's not only you need to protect against network-based attacks, which certainly is a very important component, but also you need to enforce the good IAM controls, roles and authorizations, and who can access different things. So I would say, again, same layered defense, build your security on layers.
When you say ease of deployment, are there any tooling that you do in terms of like the architecture, like for someone to get your solution running on their VLAN, for example? How easy is it to deploy it? Is it just a one click or?
It's literally one click in the sense that all our customers need to do is just bring up the VM on their VLAN network. And the moment you boot up the VM, it shows you a 6-digit activation code. So the customer just copies that code, punches it into our UI SaaS portal. We complete the handshake and download all the policies, all the configuration, everything, and your network is up and running. So literally it takes just a few minutes to bring up an air gap network compared to like legacy approaches.
Then once you're on there, so you have a full observability on everything, all the devices in the network.
Exactly. Once you have activated and onboarded the air gap network, what happens is we immediately we assume the role of the DHCP IP address assignment functionality within the network. We also become the default gateway. So by doing that, within a few minutes, all the traffic within your network starts flowing through our security appliance sitting in your VLAN. Not only is appliance enforcing security, but it's also like gathering analytics, which are immediately pushed to our cloud portal. They become like visible in a few minutes. And we have like very interesting options like we learn from the traffic, and based on the learning, we kind of recommend like suggested policies and things like that based on common ransomware attacks and threat intel feeds we are continuously monitoring. So we actually kind of come up with a recommended saying that right from day one, here is something you need to kind of install to make your network like instantly secure from all these attacks.
So going back to that coffee shop example, so I've got my air gap virtual net in my company VLAN, and my device has visited whatever the coffee shop and it's infected. Now I come on to office. Obviously, not physically, but virtually through the office network. What happens then? So how will this gateway recognize that this is a faulty, something's wrong with this device?
Going back to the coffee shop analogy, you are sitting in a coffee shop, you unsuspectingly click on a phishing link, some popular ransomware strain gets launched on your particular laptop. And let us say the next day, you either physically join your enterprise network or virtually via maybe a remote access VPN solution. So the moment you do that, what happens is your system is now part of your enterprise network. Like any normal enterprise system, it will request for an IP address, become part of the VLAN network, which is being managed by the air-gapped security appliance. The moment it joins the air-gapped security network, we place like a virtual ring fence around your device. We do a couple of smart things around the networking to make sure that no traffic can go in and out of your device unless inspected and authorized by air-gapped. So now let's say your ransomware, which might be sitting dormant on your device, now starts to go active. It starts to scan the network to see what are the other systems it can compromise. So air-gapped immediately detects this scan, and we, based on, again, configurable user policies, we can actually quarantine the device immediately. And there may be smarter ransomware which might try to circumvent the air-gapped's virtual ring fencing mechanism itself. So we have like strong controls in place around that. So we actually detect such attempts and again, either automatically quarantine this particular device or alert the operator through an alerting mechanism saying that, hey, there is this networks, which definitely looks suspicious from our point of view. So we have basically quarantined it so that it cannot do any damage on your network, but it's left for the operator to do further forensic analysis on it.
Do you also have people cribbing about the speed because now it takes a while to get onto the network?
No, in fact, we are an inline security device in that sense. All the traffic flows through us, but we have extremely low latency packet forwarding built into our product. Extremely high throughput and extremely low latency. So a normal enterprise, we have actually tested it with large enterprises of thousands of users, sending like several gigabytes of traffic through it. And a normal user would not notice any noticeable latency. I'm not saying that there'll be zero latency. There is a few milliseconds latency on certain transactions, but a normal user would definitely not notice anything. It does let you work normally uninterrupted in any way. Of course, our solution also has like full high availability. For example, you might ask me what happens is the air-gapped appliance now a single point of failure kind of.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to ask you that next. So you read my mind.
Right. So what happens is, so we actually let you deploy a cluster of such appliances. So all of them kind of form like a redundancy cluster kind of thing. So even if one of them were to go down, a backup instance would take its function. The traffic would automatically get routed through the backup instance. So other than a few milliseconds of delay, you would not notice anything, even if an appliance were to fail as well.
The latency is not much, and you'll be immediately able to detect that something faulty and have alert either the organization or the user. It's something like a command and control center is what you're going to be alerting. Like, how does this observability go back to the organization? Does it go to the organization's command and control center? How does it work?
We have two ways of alerting built into our product. So one is definitely our own SaaS portal where we have all the alerts and notifications getting real-time streamed to it. But we do realize that most enterprises like to actually consolidate different security solutions into a single SIM. SIM is a common term for the security incident and event management system kind of thing. A good example is Splunk, for example, is a good SIM. We do stream our events, logs, threat alerts to any industry standard SIM. So most SecOps personnel would just use a single pane of glass across all these different security products and take proactive action based on that.
Okay, that's great. And maybe we can again switch gears and talk about some few key steps in protecting the network. So apart from your threat intelligence that you talked about, which is actively making sure that the latest ransomware threats are caught. The other thing that you talked about in the beginning was identity management. And would it be okay to say that multi-factor authentication is also very important in the zero trust network? So I guess anyone joining the network, how does that work? Would they have like a two-factor authentication? How do you trust the devices?
This is very relevant now because of the hybrid work scenarios we've been seeing. The traditional ways of remote access into your enterprise assets, it's always historically been based on technologies like VPN, which is a virtual private networks. So the way VPNs works is these create like things like IPsec or a TLS tunnel from your device into your enterprise network. So once the tunnel has been set up, you have complete network level access to all your applications. It's almost as if you're virtually sitting inside your enterprise network. So recent breaches which happened, there was this Colonial Pipeline attack, the gas pipeline in the US. So here the attack was actually based on a VPN breach. So the VPN did not have a two-factor authentication. The credentials were compromised. The attackers were actually getting into the Colonial Pipeline network and compromise a large number of systems. So the way the industry has moved forward from these kind of VPN-based solutions is to provide an alternative method of access called Zero Trust Network Access, ZTNA. To compare and contrast with a VPN network, once you're connected to the network, you have access to all the systems, and this access is always on. That means your critical applications are always exposed to the network, irrespective of whether they're being accessed or not. Let me give you a good example. Let's say you have a finance application or an HR portal within your enterprise. So you as an authorized employee have 24/7 access to that finance application. The moment you're on the VPN, you can go to the portal for the finance application, log in using your username, password, and get into it. But if your credentials were compromised, an attacker would be able to do the same and get into the finance application. Contrast that with a zero trust network architecture where access to the applications is not provided at the network level, but it is what we commonly call as a session-based access. So the way you would access such a system using the ZTNA architecture is you go to your browser and you type in like a special URL kind of thing, which will redirect you to a ZTNA gateway. AirGap provides a ZTNA gateway. Technically, it's a reverse web proxy. So the request actually goes to the reverse web proxy. At that point, we look at your request and say that, we need you to first authenticate with a single sign-on provider. So we integrate with popular SSO solutions like Ping Identity, Google Auth, Azure AD, and other solutions with it. So what you'll notice as a user on your browser is the moment you try to access your finance application, your browser gets redirected to Okta, let us say using Okta, right? So you'll be forced to authenticate using Okta, and Okta has capabilities to do things like multi-factor authentication. It'll push an alert to your phone. And you can even take it further. You can even enable like biometric authentication, like a fingerprint, retina scan. You can get really fancy with it. Once this multiple factors of authentication have been passed, we get a confirmation back from the single sign-on provider saying that this person has been authenticated. And then what we do is we open a point-to-point connection to your finance application just for your authenticated session. So now you as a remote user sitting outside, maybe outside sitting in a coffee shop, just in that particular browser tab which you have opened, you just have access to the finance application. If you have to switch to another tab, you close your browser, you would have to re-authenticate again. Compare that to your VPN-based access where once you create a VPN tunnel, you're logged into your enterprise network. And now any ransomware which has compromised your laptop is given free reins to compromise the whole network. So this is an important part of AirGap's secure application access strategy.
Mm-hmm. I guess your key resources are always like this network segmentation. So your finance server and SAP is in one place, and I guess other critical resources are in another place. That is also anyway a given, right?
Right. Traditionally, there have been these two historical concepts. Like there's something called a campus. We like to call it the enterprise campus. Campus has been the place where people, like employees, actually go and work, sit and work kind of thing. But if you look at the modern campuses of today in the 2020s era, other than employee laptops and people who bring their own devices, your BYOD devices like mobile phones, maybe IoT devices, you would not see any sensitive business assets being stored in the campus itself.
Right.
Your sensitive assets are usually stored in like databases, file servers, Windows shares, and these are typically hosted within the data center. So AirGap provides two levels of protection. So one is within the campus, we prevent your ransomware from infecting other users by air-gapping each system. And even from your compromised system, when the ransomware tries to access a data center resource. Now, when I say data center, it could be the old school physical data center kind of thing, or it could be a modern cloud-based data center. We actually gate that access and force that access to go through the AirGap's multi-factor authentication, single sign-on integration solution. So we provide a double protection out there.
Trust no one. So I have repeated this line a couple of times, but was it from a Google engineer who said, never trust your network, it's probably already compromised. So that's your philosophy as well.
Exactly. The term zero trust actually also is popularly referred to as never trust, always verify. Take a step back and think what it really means is do not assume that a particular access to an application is authorized just because of the physical location of the client. Like if the client is within a secure perimeter, don't assume it's a safe access. Always verify the access with a multi-factor authentication.
Don't do traditional things like IP whitelisting. Yeah.
Exactly. Don't do traditional perimeter-based security defenses.
in one of the articles on the blog in your company, which also talks about zero trust isolation. This is what you're referring to, right?
Exactly. Zero trust isolation is a new term which we have coined to kind of say that, hey, we are virtually isolating or ring fencing each of your devices. We don't trust any device just because it shows up on the enterprise network, but we always force it to authenticate and allow only authorized traffic.
Anyway, for anyone setting up a network, I think these are good lessons to learn. So I like this term ring fence. So that's great. So, whenever you have something that not really aware of, try to do this virtual kind of ring fence around it, and before it goes through all the necessary checks before coming in. And of course, like you said, identity is truly important, and just a one way is not enough. You need multiple factors to prove who you are. The other thing is, which is interesting, I wanted to talk about, since we are seeing quite a lot of attacks on ransomware, there's this thing called the ransomware kill switch. What is that? Can you explain that a bit?
Think of the ransomware kill switch as like the emergency shut-off valve at a gas station. Or another analogy we like to draw is watching the Hollywood movies, especially the ones around impending nuclear attacks. The US government typically has different DEFCON levels. They say, let's move to DEFCON level 1 or DEFCON level 2. We made a cleverful play on that word and come up with this ransomware kill switch. All it does is it provides like different color-coded buckets of security profiles and policies. So we have like different color levels, like green, yellow, orange, and red, as simple as that. If you log into our SaaS portal, you'll actually see a switch which looks like a physical selector switch with 4 colors on it. So the idea is like this. So normal operation, things are at green. Everybody has access to their authorized systems. Things are going good. Now, let us say you suspect that a particular system has been infected with ransomware. It's just a suspicion. It's not a confirmed fact at this point. You might want to move the network to a slightly elevated protection level. You toggle the switch from green to yellow. So what happens when you move from green to yellow is we shift the network security profile to a different pre-configured profile. So again, what is the security profile in yellow is completely varies from customer to customer. We leave it to them to define what is allowed access within the yellow profile. But here's an example. You might say that when I'm green, everybody has access to all the systems are fully operational. I move to ransomware threat level yellow. Maybe I shut off access to my databases and ERP systems. Everything else continues working. If the threat level increases, you move it from yellow to orange or to red. And you could say, when I move to orange, now my financial systems are completely taken offline. You get the idea. And when I move to red, complete network access is shut down, except allowing certain forensic analysis to take place. Because you cannot always 100% shut off network access, because then it's impossible for a forensic team to root cause where the attack started and shut down the system. So you definitely want forensic to take place, but you want to curtail damage or further compromise within the network. So the nice thing with these kind of layered approaches is what it lets you do is, even if you go from threat level green to threat level yellow or orange, like certain important business functions can continue to go on. For example, a CEO of the company might be on a Zoom call. You don't want to shut that off just because you went to threat level yellow or orange kind of thing. So all these can be like pre-configured policies. Ransomware kill switch essentially provides a very easy way. Just by flipping the switch, you change the state of the network. What is reachable and what is not reachable. Before we introduced this term, we actually spoke to hundreds and hundreds of CIOs, and we in fact asked them this question. What would you do if your SecOps guys come running to you and say that, hey, we suspect there's been a ransomware breach? What would your first reaction be? The most common response we got is we'd go into the data center and start yanking out cables. People used to do that. There's like a panic response to the notification that you're being breached by ransomware. People immediately start taking systems offline to prevent further damage, because you don't know, right, where the ransomware is spreading, how many systems are impacted. You immediately want to shut off access. People just power down everything. So what we are providing is a very sophisticated, controlled way of just flipping a switch in software and immediately shutting off network access on your VLAN networks, enterprise networks, your business applications, things like that.
SE Radio listeners, we want to hear from you. Please visit se-radio.net/survey to share a little information about your professional interests and listening habits. It takes less than 2 minutes to help us continue to make SE Radio even better. Your responses to the survey are completely confidential. That's se-radio.net/survey. Thanks for your support of the show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
how do I find out as an organization or enterprise what level I should be at? Is there some kind of way, like, do you help scan the network? Like, can I do a vulnerability assessment and then decide on the threat level? Or
Couple of ways to do it. We provide like API integrations with other security tools out there. Again, going back to the concept of layered defense. So let us say you have some threat intel software installed on your network, or maybe a popular EDR based solution on your network. Some of these other security vendors also do a great job like identifying ransomware attacks. So what you could set it up is in combination with those security solutions, when an attack is detected, you could actually have an integration, call an API into the air gap system and have it flip the switch from yellow to orange automatically. So there is an automatic response possible in that. Another way is you could actually run periodic vulnerability scans on your network on a timed basis. And if the scans detect something suspicious, that could be a trigger to plug in an API integration or a manual intervention to flip the ransomware kill switch.
how long does it take for a vulnerability scanner to run? Like, does that depend on the network and how many devices? Or
So it definitely depends upon the size of the network. In fact, if you go to our AirGap website, we provide our own version of a lightweight ransomware vulnerability scanner. So what this does is you just download the tool, just a simple Windows-based utility. You can just run it on any Windows laptop. A Mac OS version is coming up soon too, but you run it on a Windows laptop within your enterprise. It scans a lot of assets within your enterprise. It scans the networks. If you have a Windows Active Directory set up, it will scan the Windows Active Directory, figure out what are all the systems on your network which are vulnerable to popular ransomware attacks. We have compiled a lot of data from previous ransomware attacks. It's like a database we're constantly updating. So we go look for these common vulnerabilities. So we will provide you a comprehensive report saying that these are the systems which are vulnerable. And also we identify which systems are more compromisable to, like, for example, you mentioned NotPetya as a particular ransomware strain, right? We actually identify saying that these 4 systems on your network are compromisable by NotPetya. So we actually identify to that degree out there. This can provide you a good visibility. It's a simple tool. You can run it at any time. And there are other security vendors like Qualys and a couple of vendors who also provide excellent tools to scan your network on a regular basis. I think it's part of a good security hygiene to do periodic scans and let your SecOps team analyze the results.
what about this case where some people ask, have you done a ransomware or say a malware assessment on your network? How does one go about that? Do you just draw out a network diagram and then see, okay, I mean, what is the level of detail? Can you model for such things? Like, I'm not only talking about ransomware attacks, but maybe, other kinds of attacks, I don't know, phishing attacks. So what's a kind of modeling? Is that something that you recommend people do?
Yeah, there has been a couple of tools which have been put out by I think it's the US Department of Homeland Security, which you can actually download it off their website. These actually help you build a model or a security posture for your enterprise. What these tools do is think of it more like a guided questionnaire kind of thing. They have leveraged upon the best practices they've seen from good organizations which have protected themselves successfully. So they actually walk you through this questionnaire, force you to think through these scenarios. Think of it like an internal audit of your network. By just answering this questionnaire, and you're absolutely right that these kind of tools actually make you draw a topology for the network, ask you to build out an inventory of what systems you have, what operating system versions are running, what patch levels they're running at, all part of good security hygiene. They actually take you through this exercise, force the thought process to perform an audit on your network, and definitely a good practice to do at any point of time, because it's all part of good security hygiene, like keeping systems up to date, all the layers. If you have all the operating systems patched with the latest security patches, that would reduce your compromise risk quite significantly.
That's interesting that you talk about patching, because I think this couple of attacks recently has also been caused by updating to the latest patch, because I think there have been cases where a malware or something was introduced in a patch. So, it's a delicate balance, right? Like, you need to patch, but you also have to make sure that the patch is not vulnerable. So
that is very, very true. So I think you're referring to the Kaseya attack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Kaseya, and a little before that, there was a SolarWinds attack. Both of these are what are termed as supply chain attacks. So supply chain attack, it's a whole category of attacks where, so there is trust involved here. You're trusting the software vendor. So you're trusting the SolarWinds company to actually follow good security hygiene, make sure that their software repositories are not compromised. You're implicitly trusting the vendor and installing their patches, installing their agents. And the Kaseya attack actually went after the supply chain components itself and compromised it at the source. So most unsuspecting users downloaded the latest update thinking they were protecting the systems, as you rightly said, got compromised as a result. I think we're still in the beginning of the industry is still trying to come to terms with how to protect against these kind of attacks. A lot more hygiene and policy has to go around that. But again, I would say combine that with a good network micro-segmentation strategy like air gap solution, putting a little bit of plug here, which would ensure that even if individual systems were compromised, widespread network damage would not happen.
One of the key takeaways from this is in the steps to protect your network. Yeah, don't trust anyone, including a management firm that you're hiring to do security. Segmentation is a big key thing, like where you place your critical resources and having an air gap. We've covered also a little bit about the scanning capabilities. Can you talk a little bit more about IoT devices? Now, they are prevalent like everywhere, right? Like you had mentioned at the beginning, they are traditionally very difficult to secure. So the only way out is coming through your gateway, right? Or is there anything special that you do? Like how do you ring fence an IoT device? What do you do?
This is where we at least believe that AirGap's agentless solution for ransomware protection really shines. Because we look at other traditional approaches to ransomware protection, they're all based on some kind of endpoint defense. So we call them as EDR, endpoint detection and response. As we previously covered, on an IoT device, it's almost impossible to install any kind of security vendor's agent on it. Web camera in a conference room, you cannot install anything on it. These devices are also frequently most vulnerable to attacks because they are usually running like custom operating systems or outdated operating systems, which may not have all the security controls a modern Linux kernel or Windows operating system would have. So they're very easily breachable. And the attackers frequently use these as a launching pad to further probe the network and infect other systems. So this is where AirGap solution really shines because we provide like network level micro-segmentation. We are a security appliance sitting on your network. Your IoT device automatically, when it requests an IP address from our AirGap security device, we virtually ring fence it automatically and allow only authorized traffic. For example, we will shut down any access. If your IoT device is talking to your CEO's laptop, which it should not be in any case, we would flag that access and quarantine the device. Whereas we could set up security policies saying that think about an Apple TV or a Roku device used for streaming video, right? Yeah. So in a conference room, people usually share their presentations to an Apple TV. We will ensure that communication always goes from a Windows laptop or a Mac OS laptop into the Apple TV, but no outbound connection from the Apple TV to any other device on your network. So that is unauthorized as far as we are concerned.
Interesting. So there's no way someone can hack into the Apple TVs.
You can get very, very granular, fine-grained with this. So all this is happening because of the rich profiling and learning we're doing within the network.
Like you just mentioned, companies spend hours coming up with policies, but actually no one really follows these policies unless there's a very strong implementation. So how do you solve this problem? Like once somebody defines it, the enforcement, how does that happen? What is your, advice for companies?
We have had years of experience building security products. We do recognize how creating and maintaining security policies is an operational challenge for organizations. So what we have come up with, we have tried to simplify the process of creating and managing policies. So the way we do that is we introduce something called an autonomous group or a tag-based model. So where your SecOps personnel can create groups based on like certain network attributes or device attributes like operating system, manufacturer. We also partner with other security companies. For example, if you have like other EDR vendors deployed on your network, they actually compute like device security scores or like a security posture. Like another security vendor can tell us that this particular, for example, Priyanka's laptop has a security score of 75. So we can actually, in our AirGap portal, we can say that, hey, all laptops with security score greater than 75, whose operating system is such and such, maybe Windows or Mac OS. Maybe we can also say, does it have a valid device certificate issued by the enterprise? Only these devices should be allowed to communicate with your finance systems. So really, really fine-grained tag-based policies. Compare and contrast this to traditional firewalls, where policies have always been based on IP addresses.
IP address.
It was very hard to manage in a dynamic environment like an enterprise because IP addresses are constantly changing. DHCP leases are renewing, people are walking in and out. As you say, they soon fall into disuse and people just blanket allow everybody to talk to everybody kind of thing. So it's very hard to manage this. So we are trying to solve this with something called autonomous group-based policies.
Making things too fine grain also makes it very confusing, right? So it's just that correct balance because, I was working in a company where they had these role-based access and they kept adding roles and finally there were some 150 roles. So nobody knew what role they needed to access a particular result. So finally the way they solved the problem was give everybody system admin privileges because it was a mess. You ring home a very important point that how you set up your policies is also a very important part in protecting your network.
Yeah.
Other question in terms of observability, you did say that you send your logs, etc., to any of these observability tools like Splunk for dashboarding, etc. One of the questions I had also about the isolated network, right? The air gap virtual network. What about that? Do you get the question I want to ask is, do you have like a score like every day saying, it's good today, like you had your green, orange, red? Do you have the same thing for each of these isolated networks saying that it's good, it's been scanned, it's good? Like what's the kind of observability that you can give at that segmentation level?
Talking about comprehensive security solutions, continuously observing and monitoring threats, trying to look for known attack vectors and patterns. All these need to be part of a good security hygiene. Any SecOps organization needs to build this tooling and infrastructure in place. Having said that, we actually sit very close to the devices in the network, literally on the shared VLAN. We're looking at all the chatter which goes on between the devices. A lot of the modern day devices, especially IoT devices, they talk to each other quite a bit. You'd be surprised if you look at the traffic on a network. There's a lot of chatter going on using protocols such as Apple's Bonjour protocol. And then there is another protocol called Multicast DNS, MDNS protocol. So there's a lot of this chatter going on. So AirGap is constantly listening, learning from all of these protocols. We are monitoring the devices for threats and any unauthorized communication. We're also working on certain technologies kind of based on concept of like NDR, network detection and response, which kind of look for advanced threat patterns. For example, most of the ransomware attacks, they exhibit a common pattern in the sense that once they find, like, let's say a Windows file share or a network file share to encrypt, they would go about like enumerating all the files and directories on that Windows file share, and then they start encrypting it. So these kind of behaviors are easy to spot and identify and take action. So we're continuously building new technologies to monitor and observe these kind of systems. And again, we do send our current reports, alerts, events to SIM solutions to provide a consolidated view for the SecOps organization.
And I guess you also work with other tool providers to even get the data from the scanning that they do, right? Like say Qualys or something.
Definitely.
Is that also okay?
Definitely. Okay. We do learn from other scans. We also subscribe to other threat intel feeds. There are companies which provide like threat intel feeds on the popular attacks which have taken place. We use all this information to fine tune our recommendation system.
Asking you a question just purely as a network nerd, if there was this one thing that you could provide in terms of observability that gives you like this big picture view of everything, how would that look? I know it's tough to visualize in an audio podcast, but maybe you could just throw out some views.
One of the challenges with observability is there is a lot of noise and false positive. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack kind of problem. I think you raised a great point earlier. Like, I would prefer any observability solution to have a hierarchical drill down kind of thing. Right when you go down to a dashboard, as you rightly said, you can see like overall security scores for different air gap networks. What is the health status and things like that. And then drill down to a particular network only if there is cause for concern, like if the security score has dropped, drill down and then try to diagnose what's happening. I do strongly believe a hierarchical top-down information aggregation effort is required for any good observability solution. Otherwise, it's a very unmanageable problem to make use of effectively.
It's probably true of maybe, different, we're talking about networks, but that can also hold true of like, say, software bugs or any other things.
Definitely, or your cloud-based workloads.
Exactly.
It's a common theme across all software architectures and deployments.
Otherwise, it becomes the story of a boy who cried wolf, right? Because when the real attack happens, you're like, it's okay. It's just another thing. It's a false positive. Yeah,
exactly.
There.
In fact, if you look at the SolarWinds attack, I believe that is what happened. There was an alert on some SIM systems console, but nobody caught it. Just because of so much of noise happening, people mentally start tuning out to these alerts after a certain period of time.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance. After having this conversation with you, Satish, that I maybe have to take a course in, how the military does things. It would be worthwhile to learn from there, because I think they also have this pretty key challenge, right? Pretty much the same thing. How do you find out which part of your borders can get infiltrated? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. So just to, I guess, wind down, I think the main things, if I were to summarize, I think we've talked about air gapping networks, the importance of having segmentation, identity, which is, I think you talked heavily about, saying that it's so important to not trust anyone and have a zero trust principle in your networking architecture. And of course, observability is again something we talked about. Anything else that you would like to add before we end the show on what else we should do to protect your network?
Again, I go back to the theme of zero trust security. One last thing I'd like to leave our listeners with is there is this concept known as the least privilege principle. Basically, what that means is that every component on your system must be able to access only the resources it has been authorized to and nothing more than that. So I think SecOps teams have to take a proactive role in using this as more as a guideline to make sure that even if a system were to be compromised or breached, the damage can be contained.
One of the pillars of a good security architecture.
Good zero trust security. Yes, that's right.
This is great. Thank you so much for this enlightening talk, Satish. And before I let you go, is there a place where listeners can reach you? Are you active on Twitter or LinkedIn?
Available on both on Twitter and LinkedIn. I think I'm slightly more active on LinkedIn, so it's probably the preferred way to find me. It's actually Satish_M_Mohan. Sorry for the long Twitter handle.
I'll add that to the show notes, and I guess we'll also have your LinkedIn profile there. It's been great having you on the show, and I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. This was really enjoyable talking to you.
This is Priyanka Raghavan for Software Engineering Radio. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to SE Radio, an educational program brought to you by IEEE Software Magazine. For more about the podcast, including other episodes, visit our website at se-radio.net. To provide feedback, you can comment on each episode on the website or reach us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or through our Slack channel at seradio.slack.com. You can also email us at team@se-radio.net. This and all other episodes of SE Radio is licensed under Creative Commons License 2.5. Thanks for listening.